Hello and welcome back to Tachikawa. You are listening to Sakamichi Nights. My name is Matthew Boynton, and in an extraordinary break from tradition, I am joined today not by Daniel Bellamy, but by a new guest. We are very lucky to have with us Noah Oskau. How you doing, Noah?
I'm doing pretty well. I was not anticipating being the co-host tonight, but big shoes to fill. But I'll do it gladly.
Big shoes to fill, big tubes to fill. It's going to be a wonderful evening of beer discussion and tubing. Let's start with a very easy question, Noah. Do you like beer?
Yeah, you could say I like beer.
Okay, I'm very glad you said yes, because this could have been a very awkward 35 minutes.
Have you ever had anyone on who doesn't like beer?
Yes, we have, actually, yes.
How did that go?
We tried to persuade her that she should like beer, and basically failed in that endeavor.
I would anticipate that would be the end result there.
So we've established you like beer. That's good.
Yes.
Base level here. Mm-hmm. Do you like craft beer?
I would say that if I like beer, I love craft beer.
Excellent. Okay, this is all going the way that I dreamed it was going to go last night. You were dreaming of this last night. In your craft beer journey, what was the beer that turned you on to the magic that is craft beer?
It's a very difficult thing to answer. I started drinking beer only in college, honestly. Sophomore year, I think. I was pretty much a teetotaler all the way through high school. And once I got to college at the University of Kansas, the drinking culture was really all about hard liquor, taking shots. That was kind of how I started drinking in a very... kind of a get drunk as fast as you can sort of environment, and beer had no place there. And the very first beer I ever really drank, my roommate back at KU kind of foisted Coors Light upon me. Have you ever had a Coors Light?
I believe I have, yes.
I'm very sorry to hear that.
Would you class that as craft beer?
In that, if any endeavor involves a craft, then perhaps, but even then, I think there's not necessarily that much craft involved.
A journey of 10,000 beers starts with one Coors Light.
Yes, and something that I really had to force myself to drink. I really did not enjoy it. I think the first beer I ever enjoyed was also something that would not be considered a craft beer. It was a Blue Moon.
All right.
Yeah.
Not too terrible.
We're getting closer.
Yeah.
We're getting closer here. That was when I was like, oh, wait, beer can taste... It can taste. I think that's just like the end of the sentence, is that it can taste.
This is an experience I can enjoy. Goodness me.
It's not something I have to force myself to do in order to kind of feel as though I'm living up to the standards of my roommate at the time. But it's very hard to say what my first craft beer was, because craft beer is so ubiquitous now in the United States that very shortly, once I enjoyed beer, I was just drinking a lot of craft beer. I guess as like a Minnesotan, I'll just say it was a Surly. That's kind of like our representative craft beer that was very nice. Maybe my first IPA. So let's just go with that.
No, we've had Surly in here before. They make extremely good beer. Yeah, I'm familiar with them. Not related to the bicycle company, although they're both from the same town and share the same name, extraordinarily. You're a denizen of Tokyo now,
yes,
right?
Yes.
Do you have a go-to place if you want to enjoy a few craft beers that you don't mind blowing up on this podcast?
Well, I would never want to blow it up. But, I mean, honestly, right now, if I want to have craft beer, I probably would come here. I'd come here to Sakamichi.
Yes, this is the correct answer. Other than this, though, where would you recommend for people who want to get a craft beer in Tokyo?
That's a very good question. What is nice these days is that it's more possible to find craft beer. These days there's craft beer being sold in the konbini. Obviously, that's not a good answer for, go to this place for craft beer. Most of my drinking in Tokyo, it's usually sake and shochu and cocktails. I'm really into, classy cocktails. That's, one of my things. I don't really have a place that I personally seek out for craft, except for right now Sakamichi, because I'm in Western Tokyo, and it's not too far, to get here, so... Yeah, I'm just going to keep on saying your location if it doesn't, tread on the aspirations of mentioning another brand.
No, absolutely. The check is in the mail. We don't.
We can write at least one article in Unseen Japan with
it. We don't talk about a lot of other drinks on this podcast other than beer, but I quite enjoy a cocktail every now and again. Summer of the mojito. Do love a nice mojito in the summer. What kind of cocktails have you been enjoying recently?
Mojitos are nice. They are not like in my like immediate wheelhouse when it comes to cocktails necessarily. I'm at my heart definitely like a martini person.
Ooh.
The most famous place for martinis in all of Japan would be Mori Bar out in Ginza. And as soon as I got back into Japan, because I was locked out of the country for a good year because of COVID before I got married.
Right.
I'd been reading this book called Tokyo Cocktails, and I was just basically practicing like all these different cocktails as made by the masters here in Japan. And had been very excitedly looking forward to getting back to Japan. In the first place, I went for a cocktail. It was Mori Bar. I had that famous martini. It was very, very nice, so I can at least recommend that.
Excellent. So we'll have 8 pints of craft beer here at Sakamichi Brewing and then head into town for some cocktails.
Excellent. I mean, by the time that we're done with the 8 pints, maybe it'll be open again.
Yes. Sounds like a plan to me. Well, good. We've established a baseline here, which is you enjoy a drink. That's good. I'm very glad to hear that. But now that we're through with that, maybe we could talk a little bit about you. There might be 1 or 2 people listening to this podcast. I could just stop that sentence right there. There might be 1 or 2 people listening to this podcast who don't know who you are.
There's probably, if there's 2 people listening, they probably both don't know who I am. So yeah, it's probably a good idea.
I think my parents have heard of you. But could you give us a very brief introduction to who you are and what you do here in Japan?
Sure. So, as you said, I'm Noah Oskow. I'm originally from the United States, from Minnesota, and I am currently the editor-in-chief of Unseen Japan, which maybe the guy on the motorcycle over there has heard of.
Big fan.
Yeah, he's just coming by to say hello. I'm a translator and interpreter by trade, but I'm also a journalist for Unseen Japan, and also, as I said, editor-in-chief, and I also manage our YouTube channel. So, essentially, I've lived in Japan on and off for 8 years plus. Long experience. First time I was here was 2006 as a high schooler, and I've kind of been coming and living, back in Japan on and off like ever since then. That's essentially an explanation of who I am.
That's very good. I'm sure you get this question all the time, but what was it that first attracted you to Japan as a high schooler?
So I actually, I was first interested in Japan when I was like in kindergarten.
Okay.
So it's actually much older. My dad was really into martial arts. He did Aikido and karate, and there was a lot of Japanese stuff around the house. So I was kind of interested into that because I was aware that this country existed at a time when most people don't really have, much kind of conception of foreign countries necessarily. Right. But as I grew older, it was the standard thing that everyone has, which is, it's anime and manga and Japanese movies and things like that really drew me in. And then I got really into Japanese history, and anyone who reads Unseen Japan in my articles can probably glimpse a bit of that interest in history and what I write.
So Unseen Japan shines a light on some parts of Japanese history that people might be unfamiliar with. Is that right?
I hope so. I like to take these deep dives into things that, perhaps like intercultural meeting points, where like the history of one country and another country kind of meets. So like Japan and Russia on the border in Sakhalin, when they both contested that island up north. That was my master's thesis, actually, which was completed a few years ago. But yeah, we when it comes to history, we like to talk about history that maybe goes a little bit deeper and kind of like discusses the extreme the variance that exists in Japanese history. Most of what we cover on Unseen Japan, it includes a lot of news, a lot of cultural content, but if possible, we like to kind of uplift voices that aren't heard that often, kind of show the kind of a more, more the other levels of diversity that exist here in Japan that aren't necessarily on everyone's radar. That's something that's important to us.
Yeah, I think that's really important. I think looking from outside or speaking to people who aren't that familiar with Japan, it's quite a common misconception that Japan is a monolith and everybody here feels the same about things and does the same kind of things.
Yeah.
And you're trying to uplift voices that perhaps show that isn't the case.
Yeah, that's true. And, we try to do so, of course, via Japanese perspectives as much as possible. Of course, what Japanese means necessarily, there's a lot of kind of definitions of exactly what that is. And, of course, this includes, people whose ethnicities aren't necessarily a traditional Yamato Japanese ethnicity, indigenous people, Ainu and Ryukyuans, people of mixed race heritage here in Japan, of course, foreigners here in Japan as well, people who have Japanese nationality but aren't necessarily ethnically, derived from ancient Japan. And of course, like all sorts of different voices of people that you don't hear as much. The voices of Japanese women. It's very, really important to the website, and I think like kind of the foundation of Unseen Japan is really based upon those sorts of ideas.
That's great. You're very active on Twitter, both personally and through Unseen Japan. Maybe combating some of those misconceptions. What would you say is the biggest misconception that you find yourself having to correct over and over again in your Twitter discourse?
Of course, Unseen Japan is well known for our Twitter discourse. There's there's no getting around it. Of course, I'll add that our Unseen Japan, the account is a team account. It's a staff account. Sometimes it's me posting. Sometimes it's Jay Allen, who's the founder of Unseen Japan. The biggest thing that Unseen Japan always feels, we definitely feel like we need to discuss if it gets brought up, I suppose, it's just kind of, it's exactly as you say. Whenever there is this statement about this is what Japan is, this is what Japan has always been, like that Japan has never had this element existing in it, or that, that something goes back to time immemorial, and that anything that is not exactly a part of that monolith is not a natural thing to exist in the country. So much of Japanese history is that we think of as being so ancient is a creation of the Meiji era, or perhaps a little bit before that. I mean, there's so much more to the country, and so much more diversity of thought and of people, and that's a very important thing for us to push back against. When people say, this is what Japan is, and it can't be anything else, and especially the Japanese people cannot have other opinions than what they are assuming regarding Japan.
Yeah, I have often heard Japan and Britain being described as being quite alike island nations at the end of their large landmass. And that's another similarity right there. A lot of what are considered to be our time immemorial traditions in the UK were just invented by the Victorians. They were just made up. And if you look back through history, there are all these diverse voices and Republican voices and rebellious voices who tend not to get heard in the official narrative. So I think that is true of both countries, I suppose.
It's a very interesting comparison. I mean, of course, there are a lot of ways where the two countries can be compared. And I haven't thought too much about that exact sort of idea of like when the UK kind of coalesced into like the version that we think of it as being now. These like you said, like ancient traditions that are perhaps very modern inventions that exist in both countries. Very interesting.
Speaking of modern invented traditions, why do we drink some beer? That's what we're here to do.
Yeah.
We will talk more about Unseen Japan and about the great work you do later on. But to lube the conversation, why don't we try one of the beers that we have released recently. This was a beer we made for May the 4th, Star Wars Day. It is a double dry hopped Imperial Pale Ale, and it is called Hop Executor. Not, as everyone keeps saying, Hop Executor. That's a completely different word. It's named after Darth Vader's flagship. It's the Hop Executor. It's a double dry hopped Imperial Pale Ale. Why don't we get stuck into it and discuss what we think of this beer? All right, we're back. I cannot believe that the Imperial segue was staring me in the face right there, and I failed to pick it up. Unbelievably poor. If Dan was here, I'm sure he would have done it.
I'm disappointed. What can I say?
I'm disappointed in myself, Noah. But I'm not disappointed in this beer. What do you make of the Hop Executor Double Dry Hop Imperial Pale Ale?
It's a beer fit for Darth Vader.
For an evil Sith Lord.
I suppose, yeah, an evil Sith Lord. I don't like it. It doesn't have a lot of very dark and evil feelings to it necessarily. I'm gonna have another sip here and see if I can't think of exactly how this makes me feel. It's a very nice beer, though.
We were talking about the process of tasting on the last episode. I think it was on the last episode. And the first thing the book said to do was to hold it up and look at the colour. How would you describe the colour of this beer?
It's a slightly cloudy, golden color.
Light amber, perhaps.
Yes, indeed. That is perhaps the more accurate way to describe it.
No, deep gold, light amber. Very good. Okay, let's have a sniff of the beer. Let's take in some of the aromas. Swirl the glass around. Stick your nose in there. What kind of aromas are you getting out of this? So the first thing that comes into your head.
It's slightly fruity.
Yep.
maybe a tiny whiff of the woodland, but it's hard for me to discern.
A whiff of the woodland. Yeah. I like that. Yeah, I like that. For me, it smells sweet. I'm getting a lot of sweet citrus out of this one.
Indeed, yeah.
Like a pomelo or something. Let's taste it. Swirl it around. Take a little sip. Does that taste match the aroma, or do you feel it's different on the nose and on the palate?
I think that for me the taste does match the aroma. It's light. It's a bit fruity. It has it's like you're saying. It has this sweet quality to it, as far as I can tell. Yeah, it's a nice complete package.
Sweet fruits. I get quite a lot of tropical fruitness at the front of the palate, and then some dank bitterness at the back as the beer finishes.
Now that you mention it, I've had another sip. I'm able to perceive what you're discussing.
This is the wonderful thing about tasting. Yeah, it's overall it's quite nice. It's an IPA. It's a double dry hopped IPA. We chose the word Imperial for the Star Wars tie-in. If you see the word Imperial on a beer description, what does that say to you? What does that mean to you?
Usually, when I'm having something that has Imperial in it, it's usually something that's quite dark.
Right.
Is my experience. I know I think there's an Imperial out in the U.S. that uses Rasputin on the label, perhaps. I think of something that's dark, and for me kind of brings to mind a very dark beer you might drink in a log house in the Siberian hinterland. But perhaps I'm just completely off base here.
No. You're straying slightly into pairing zone there. But I think the beer you're talking about is Old Rasputin, which is a Russian Imperial stout, I believe. A lot of times the word Imperial just means strong.
Oh.
Right, so an Imperial stout is the same as a normal stout, but it's got more alcohol in it. So it's stronger, so it's got more malt, so it tastes more.
Worthy of an empire.
Exactly, yes.
Okay.
And an Imperial IPA is like a regular IPA, but stronger. And so an Imperial Pale Ale, it's like a normal Pale Ale, but it's stronger and it has more hops in it. That's just an IPA at that point, isn't it?
Yeah.
So yeah, for those of you who were wondering, Imperial just generally means strong.
I've learned something new today. Thank you.
Double dry hopped. What do you imagine we mean by that?
I imagine that it has double the amount of hops. That is my immediate assumption. Dry hopped. I imagine that the hops have been dried.
You are correct in both of those assumptions. That's right.
I'm really glad that I was able to perceive that from the obvious elements of the name.
Sorry, I was putting you a bit on the spot there. But dry hopping is what we refer to when we're putting the hops into beer, which is in the fermenter. So it's on the cold side. So these hops aren't being boiled or heated at all. So we're just extracting the aroma and a tiny bit of the flavor. Double dry hop means we do that twice. Basically, so it's twice the amount.
Excellent. Okay.
Yeah.
I'm learning even more.
You nailed it. As you know from your close listening to this podcast, we also like to pair the beer with something every time we drink one. We usually say that we can't have the two most recent ones, but it's Dan's job to keep track of what those were, and he's not here and I can't remember. So we'll just say anything goes tonight. Number 6, activity. So you can enjoy this beer whilst doing just about anything. What would you like to pair this beer with? What activity?
As much as I mentioned, a dacha, log dacha out in Siberia, for me, this beer is something I would probably more enjoy sitting by the Sumida River on a sunny day, watching the boats go by. There's something to me that's kind of summery about this beer. It's not not to the extent of a very light beer or a radler with lemon in it or something like that. But to me, this is something I would really enjoy outdoors, camping, or by some body of water. That's the sort of thing it's kind of bringing to mind for me.
Would you even consider perhaps getting into the body of water on some kind of flotation device?
Yeah, now that you mention it, I'm just thinking about this kind of circular inner tube.
Like a big donut kind of thing.
Donutty, very donutty, like something that Homer Simpson would immediately want to, ingest.
And you could float down the river whilst in this?
Well, yeah. Whilst drinking this beer for I would gladly have 7 or 8 of these beers over the course of many hours on a tube trip.
Wow, that sounds very relaxing. What is it about the Sumida-gawa, though, that made you choose that one as opposed to any of Tokyo's other rivers?
Well, I think that, when it comes to the history of Tokyo, and I'm pretty, especially these days, I'm doing a lot of, tour guiding, and of course I'm writing a lot about the history of Tokyo, and the Sumida is really, the historically foundational river when it comes to the city Tokyo and Edo before it. And to be honest, I was also just on one of those boats going down it, maybe 3 days ago.
Okay, so it's on your mind.
Very much so.
What do you mean by the foundational river? What does that mean?
Historically speaking, that river was a really important part of the city. Not only was it kind of like a boundary for the city as well, because of course Edo was much, much smaller than the Tokyo that we know today, whether it's the 23 wards or the prefecture itself. That river and the bridges that spanned it, there was a lot of activity. There were all of these geisha houses that were right there on the river. There were all these restaurants that were right there on the river. There was so much culture happening there. And, every year there would be the river opening festival where there would be thousands and thousands of these party boats out on the Sumida. So there's a lot of the kind of history of Edo that's tied up in imagery of the Sumida in particular. So I have a bit of an attachment to it based on that.
That's quite a picture. If you were able to, do you think you would prefer to drink this beer at some point in history along the Sumida-gawa?
Of course, drinking a beer in Japanese history is you'd have to essentially be Dutch, right? Most of the time in order to actually have a beer in this country. I know that the Dutch at one point gave some beers to the shogun, I think, in the 1730s or something.
Some Grolsch, I assume.
Yeah, well, perhaps indeed, yeah, in which case it would not be this beer. But if we can go back in time and give this beer to the Dutch, I'm sure they would love it. And in which case, I'd happily share one of these beers with Shogun EA, whatever the rest of his name was in 1740. I have no idea. I would gladly drink a beer with the Shogun. That's what I'm trying to say.
Do you think he would want to get on the flotation device?
With enough of these, yeah.
Yeah, it's just a question of how much Grolsch the Dutch can pump into him.
And what an inner tube looks like in 1740 samurai Tokugawa era Japan.
Yeah, well, we can imagine, can't we? Total sidebar, I will say that the Netherlands is the only country I've ever been where I was consistently mistaken for a local. Something about me reads as very Dutch.
Absolutely. If you had a Dutch accent, I would immediately assume you were Dutch.
Maybe it's the way I keep forcing beer on people around me all the time.
That's a possibility. You have a Dutch vibe.
I do have a Dutch vibe, that's true. You're not the first person to tell me that. That sounds like an extremely good pairing, and I like the way that you brought your knowledge of the geography of Tokyo and the history of Tokyo to bear on that. I'm going to go in a slightly different direction. Do you like Star Wars?
I do like Star Wars. It's been on my mind a bit recently, even.
Why has Star Wars been on your mind?
I just finally finished watching that Boba Fett show.
Oh, right.
Like a Mandalorian and everything, and I just been watching a lot of YouTube videos, not the bad YouTube videos about Star Wars, but just more thoughtful videos about Star Wars. It's just got Star Wars on my mind right now.
So in one of the original films, when that Imperial Navy officer has to go and give Vader some news, and
yes.
Vader is in some kind of pod thing, right, with his helmet off. Mm-hmm. What do you think he was doing in there?
Clearly he was having a Sakamichi beer.
I think he was enjoying a nice couple of pints. That's why he had the helmet off, right?
Yeah.
He
had to drink a beer through that helmet?
Ridiculous. That would be absurd. So he's in there. He's in his pod. Maybe he's watching some YouTube in there.
It's true.
It's a stressful job hunting rebels all over the galaxy. Sometimes you need to just let off some steam. And
Don't mention steam to Darth Vader. That man was burnt very badly.
Yes. Sometimes you need to quench the fires. No. Sometimes you need to lava. No, this is going terribly. Sometimes you need to just cut off the... No, that's not
good. Darth Vader, you got to give him a hand.
You got to give him a hand. Anyway.
You got to hand it to it. Yeah. Oh, my God.
I think it would be quite relaxing to get in Darth Vader's isolation booth.
With or without Darth Vader?
I mean, obviously, while he's out. I don't think he'd be very happy if he came home and found me in there. But just, crush a few beers. I might leave him some empty bottles to tidy up when he gets back in. Who's been in my bloody booth?
Is that what Darth Vader sounds like?
Yeah,
It's been a while since I've watched the movie.
The guy who's in the suit was a British bodybuilder, David Prowse.
Mr. Prowse,
who does sound like that. He has a West Country accent.
He also had a very Dutch vibe, I will say.
Yes, more Dutch vibes. But I think that would be an excellent place to enjoy this. And while I'm in there, why not crack out the Switch or something? Play a bit of the upcoming Zelda game, which I'm very excited about.
Yeah, I'm excited about that too. Do you think you could take Darth Vader's pod and place it in the Sumida River? And have that just kind of like be swept down? It's kind of like your own, much more extensive inner tube in some ways.
I think it would sink. We would need some kind of flotation device.
I was assuming that it's buoyant based on being hollow.
Oh, yes, that's a good point. Until it opens up. Well, I guess there's only one way to find out. If you and the Shogun see me whipping past you in Darth Vader's pod, please say hi. Give me a wave. I'm probably being chased by Darth Vader.
I mean, I will say, I think that Sakoku did apply to the Imperials as well from a long time ago in a galaxy far, far away. So I'm sure that the samurai will be after you very quickly.
Excellent choices this week. That was somewhat esoteric. We need Dan's calming hands on this. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but one of the other things that you guys at Unseen Japan have started doing recently is tours for overseas guests. Is that right?
That is true. Tours for anybody.
Tours for anybody, sorry. So they're not specifically catered to guests from overseas.
I mean, of course, that's who we've had so far. So,
right.
But if you want to book a tour, do a tour with us. If you want to book a tour with us, otherwise, you certainly can.
Okay, that's interesting. So I was... have you done a lot of these tours so far?
This is actually a very new venture for Unseen Japan, and even for me personally. I started... the first tour I gave was... At least the first professional tour that I gave was only back in November.
Right.
And it kind of has branched out from that experience that I personally had. So far, I think we're on group number 4 so far. So it's really still in its early days.
It's a developing process.
Mm-hmm.
What do you find are some of the most requested experiences for visitors to Japan?
The reality of, when tourists are coming here, even though, of course, they're booking a tour with us usually because they want to have a more kind of intimate and back streets experience of the country. But, of course, most people, they really want to see Tokyo and they want to see Kyoto. These are just kind of the first two big things. But what they are asking us specifically is usually they want to have not just the experience you would get on any tour or even self-guided tour. Those are the things... People, when they're coming to Japan, they have a lot of preconceptions about it, and maybe they have very specific things that they're interested in, whether it's seeing Akihabara and doing some sort of anime-related pilgrimage, or whether they have some seeing Mount Fuji. That's usually another big one too. But beyond that, they don't necessarily have a huge conception of exactly what they want to do, and usually it initially kind of revolves around the idea of Tokyo and the idea of Kyoto, and maybe wanting to go further afield as well. Right.
But being able to step away from the paths that the tourist might typically walk along.
Indeed, yeah.
And experience a more authentic version of Japan. Do you think that's accurate?
I think that the idea of authenticity is huge for travelers right now, and has been for maybe the past 20 years, this authentic version of the country. And as Japan becomes more and more touristed, and it's like the most desired location for American tourists, for example, internationally, is like Japan at this point. This idea of trying to find an authenticity beyond what the average person who comes here experiences, that's definitely something that people are looking for.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that. And do you think... Would you go further than that and say that a desire for authenticity motivates a lot of people's leisure activities or just activities these days?
Absolutely. I think this can very easily become a conversation about what are people having experiences for these days. If they're having experiences essentially to upload pictures to Instagram or to social media, trying to look authentic and feel authentic and find this authenticity in an era where you're constantly being bombarded by information about this hidden location, that special location, and this speakeasy, and this little tiny restaurant, a hole in the wall restaurant or something. This is a thing that is, I think, on the forefront of people's minds when they're considering what sort of experiences they want to have, it usually has something to do with this authenticity.
Yeah, I'm thinking not just of tourists or travelers, but just everyday people in their everyday lives. And the reason I'm leading into this is because I'm also wondering what is behind the surge over the last 3 years or so of craft beer in Japan. What is motivating people to seek out craft experiences? And I have a pet theory that it is partially to do with authenticity, right? You can enjoy a very nice commercially made beer in an izakaya, and it will be very well made, but you don't really have a sense of how it was made or where it was made. It was in a factory somewhere. Maybe a guy clicked a button on a computer. You come to a place like this and you can look through the window and see me making the beer in front of you. Not exactly the same beer that you're drinking, but more or less the same. And be part of the process and be witness to the authenticity of it. Is this me going completely mad, or do you think that that is at least part of the reason behind the popularity of craft beer recently?
I think that you are definitely onto something here. I think this, specifically if we're talking about like in Japan and maybe Japanese people getting involved and interested in craft beer, there already is this big desire for like any sort of jimoto, local anything, right? There already is this ji sake, right? Like local sake idea. And there's such a focus here in Japan on like when you go to Yamagata that you have the local thing, which, you know, in many cases was already predetermined by the government what, Yamagata's specialty in food, and Yamagata's specialty in drink, and Yamagata's specialty omiyage, souvenir. Like
we're going back to the invented traditions again.
Yeah, and I'm not knocking these traditions because, I also do this exact same thing. I love finding out what these things are in each place that I travel or go to here. There already is this idea here in Japan, this extreme focus on exactly where things come from and what is associated with where, like, that like monjayaki is associated with like Tsukishima out in Tokyo Bay, again, near the Sumida River, not to mention it again. But it's not so. For me, what you're discussing here, it's something that, to my mind, is a natural progression for people in Japan to go from already kind of really caring a lot about where things come from, caring that they're, that this, piece of meat that they had was raised in, Fukuoka Prefecture, or like paying so much attention to that, to going to kind of conceiving the fact that beer can also be this extremely localized experience. It makes a lot of sense to me.
Yeah, I completely agree. And you can go and watch Kenminsho or whatever, going back a long time, to see this desire to find the authentic experiences from all over Japan and find the real version of local stuff. But as you're saying, like, that applies to so many different things, to snacks, to activities, to sports, to clothing, and so on. So why beer this time? Was it just beer's turn? Was there some other external factor? I don't know the answer to this question.
Well, I do know some of the answers to craft beer finally booming in the past decade or so, and I'm sure that the things that you're, as both a brewer and a provider, probably know much better than I do, honestly, regarding tax changes. Really exciting topic here, but the changes of taxation and the changes of how much beer can be produced by any given company legally, which used to be extremely high and basically made it impossible for small companies to be in this market. But it is a very good question. To my mind, the combination of those changes from a top-down level from the government with the already present idea of always looking for the local thing. In some ways, maybe it is just beer's turn and it's a happy coincidence with these legalistic changes. But my idea is that you probably know a lot more about this than me and can give a more interesting answer, honestly.
Well, no, honestly, I don't know. I don't know why craft beer is having such a resurgence. I know that there is a lot of very good craft beer in Japan. But that's a real chicken and egg situation, right? Is it all there because of the demand, or is the demand there because there is so much good craft beer in Japan? I don't know. There has been good beer in Japan for a long time, since, as you mentioned, for about 20 years now, since the law was changed. But yeah, that law change was over 20 years ago now. And we've only really started to see the huge boom of microbreweries all over the place. So it could be just Japan's slow take-up of international trends. Craft beer has been booming in popularity in the US, for example, for about 15, 20 years now. That's starting to come over here at last. But honestly, I don't know. And I think it would be a fascinating avenue for inquiry to ask, why Japanese people why do you like craft beer all of a sudden?
It's
Why
feeling
is this
very Atsugiri in here all of a sudden.
Yeah, yes, that was unfortunate. Why is craft beer having its turn now? Why is it our day in the sun?
As a pre-COVID thing, there's such a huge increase of tourists coming into Japan, and there was a huge increase of tourists leaving Japan and going abroad. The Japanese tourism abroad has yet to pick up again for a variety of reasons, including the very weak yen. And kind of that increased kind of fear of the dangerous aspects of foreign countries as perceived by people. But the influx of foreign tourists to Japan is once again really picking up. And if we think about this huge increase of kind of people actually going abroad and people coming to Japan over the past decade, it's easy to imagine that this idea of craft beer being this wonderful thing that foreigners come here and maybe talk to people about, and that Japanese people go abroad and experience personally. This probably has some role to play in terms of why it's finally catching up in a sense with places like America, which have had such gigantic craft beer booms over the past 50, 20 years.
The wider access to travel has allowed for a broader cultural exchange.
A broadening of minds.
Excellent, yeah. And what better lubricant for a broadening of minds could there be than beer?
I mean, they say, you're best at speaking a foreign language when you've had a pint or two.
That is, I can attest that is 100% true, and that's why I prepare for all my meetings with the tax office with a couple of swift hearts back here. Speaking of people from around the world exchanging cultures, when you have visitors coming to Japan for your tours, do you find they have differing expectations based on their country of residence?
Yeah, certainly. Exactly what is appealing about Japan can be different depending on where you're from. But I think there's a somewhat impressive degree to which, at this point, many aspects of Japanese culture have managed to really become very globalized. Anime is a huge thing in so many places around the world. Specific anime are more popular in one place or another. The incredible popularity of Saint Seiya in South America, or the huge popularity of Captain Tsubasa in Saudi Arabia and Egypt, Jordan. These things are unique per each location, but Japan has truly, I hate to give any props to Cool Japan as a governmental policy, but there really has been a huge influx of Japanese culture into so many places around the globe. And so even though, of course, I think that everyone from different backgrounds, they have different things they come to Japan for, and maybe also different things that they can enjoy, whether or not they have different dietary requirements or anything like that. But there is a surprising amount of kind of similarity in terms of what parts of Japan they may want to see, what they may want to enjoy. Of course, whether or not they want to drink beer may depend on whether or not they come from a place where that's something that's they enjoy at all in those locations.
Yeah, that's a good point, actually, and I hadn't even considered that. But people of different cultures will have different dietary restrictions, which can be very difficult to accommodate in Japan.
So believe me, my family keeps kosher. My sister is vegetarian. My dad is vegan. I am the only person in the family who is completely, I don't want to say unbridled, because, people have very good reasons for their dietary restrictions. I'm the only person who just eats everything and essentially drinks everything. So even just on a familial level, I feel that. But, I've been arranging tours for people who don't necessarily drink because of one reason or another. I've been arranging tours for people who don't eat pork. That's like a major thing. People from all sorts of different countries and backgrounds and religions who don't eat pork. And it just so happens that I've actually been doing tours for a lot of people who have these specific reasons that they can't interact with certain aspects of Japanese culture. And pork is a huge thing. When people think of meat in Japan, they are thinking of pork. In America, we're thinking of beef. And so that's huge. Being able to drink or not drink is also huge. But thankfully there's so much in this country that's so appealing that even if you take off these, seemingly very large aspects of the culture, there's still a lot left to enjoy.
Interesting. So I wonder if the Cool Japan project had the unintended consequence of creating a lot of interest in Japan, which created a lot more visitors to Japan, which is now broadening the cultural exchange, which I might be showing my prejudice here, but I don't think that's what the LDP wanted, or was hoping to create, was to create a more internationalized Japanese population.
They were really just trying. I mean, like, we're thinking about, Prime Minister Abe. I mean, this was one of his capstone things. He wanted, this is one thing I can say about Prime Minister Abe, is he truly achieved his goal of making Japan a major international tourism destination. I mean, every year from like 2014, it was like leaps and bounds the highest year for international inbound tourism, and then the next year it would just top that all the way up until 2019. He was hoping for more tourist dollars to come into this economy as the population continues to shrink, and he succeeded. Whether or not people in Kyoto and other over-tourist places will be very happy about that is another question.
Well, you heard it here first. Tachikawa is the hottest new tourist destination for visitors from all around the world. We've got everything here. We've got a park, we've got nightmare asparagus, we've got Sakamichi Brewing, we've got Noah, you name it. We've got it. It's all here.
You've got me occasionally.
Yes, it's all here. Noah, thank you so much for joining us today. It's been a real pleasure chatting with you. If people want to read more of the things you've written or see more of your work, where can they go to find out more about you?
They can, of course, go to unseenjapan.com, where I write regularly, and they can go to our Twitter feed as well. We are very happy. Recently, we have crossed 100,000 followers and more at this point. That was a huge thing for us. Only 6 months ago, we were at 50,000 followers. We more than doubled it in just the span of half a year. Our YouTube channel, which is my pet project, really is something I'm really into, and I'm very happy to say we're about to cross 11,000 subscribers probably tonight over there. And I will mention very briefly that my next video is on the topic of the attempt to bring prohibition to Japan in the 1920s. So it covers a lot of alcohol history in Japan, a lot of booze history in Japan, and also not only the importation of ideas like drinking whiskey and drinking beer, but the idea that these things were in fact very bad, and that any modern society needed to ban alcohol, and the very interesting ways in which there was a real attempt at getting Japan on board with the American experiment in prohibition. So perhaps this might be interesting to people who enjoy a beer or two.
It sounds very interesting. And that booing sound you can hear in the background, that's the spirit of Daniel Bellamy. He's not with us here today, but his boos are here. The merest hint of a mention of prohibition in Japan. Thank you very much for joining us, Noah. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. Stay safe, and we will see you again next time.